Today's webinar is called Set It and Forget It, SAP Content Archiving in SharePoint. We appreciate you joining us today. The first thing I'd like to do is take a moment and introduce our speakers. My name is Maya Woldridge, and I'm in business development here at Gimel. And today I'm joined by our key speaker, product manager, Will Irwin.
Hello, everybody. My name is Will Irwin. I'm the Gimel Link product manager at Gimel based out of Houston, Texas, and welcome to the webinar.
Yeah. Now, before we get started, I've got a few housekeeping items to note here. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to submit them in the Q&A section on your screen, and we will answer as many as we have time for at the end of the presentation. There will also be a poll question that you'll see pop up, so please keep an eye out for that. And as always, if you have any technical difficulties, please let us know so we can assist you. And over the next couple of slides, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Gimel and how we can help you take control of your information with our suite of solutions. Founded in 2002, Gimel is a records, information management, and governance software company that helps you balance the value your information provides with the risk that it also presents. Whether you are trying to discover information in unstructured data sources, migrate from legacy systems, or comply with policies across multiple repositories, Gimel can help you achieve your information governance goals. We have a client success team and global network of partners that deliver solutions in conjunction with key partners like Microsoft and SAP. Gimel's family of software products work together to let you create an efficient digital workplace. Our comprehensive solutions there up on the screen include migration, file analysis, and e-discovery, electronic and physical records management, and document management for SAP. So with that, if you are on this webinar with us today, you are probably not a stranger to SAP software. For those who may not know, SAP is the leader in managing business processes and providing workflows within departments. SAP states that nearly 77% of all transactional revenue worldwide touches SAP in some way. In a nutshell, SAP is a powerful tool. It provides modules to map and design business processes, as well as real-time analytics on what is happening in day-to-day activities. The data handled by SAP is often transactional data, and the tool supports a multitude of business operations, including the ones you see there on the screen: financial accounting, human resources, production planning, inventory management, as well as customer experience. So clearly, SAP is a powerful tool for centralizing data management to encourage smoother business processes. However, it's hard to ignore one major setback we see when using SAP, and that is the challenge of storing SAP content. With so many modules, you can imagine that this tool involves just a massive amount of content, ranging from customer invoices to engineering designs. Just think about that statistic I mentioned earlier on the last slide, which was 77% of all transactional revenue worldwide touches SAP in some way. Imagine just how much content the software deals with. And for as much content as SAP touches, it was actually not designed to be a content repository, but rather an enterprise resource planning tool. And that's going to bring us to the focus of today's webinar, which is: where are companies storing their SAP content, and how is the repository of choice affecting overall processes and cost of ownership?
Yeah, thank you, Maya.
I'll hand it over to you to discuss some of the options there.
Yeah, thanks, Maya. That's some great information there. Yeah, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So what we're talking about now are the three most common default options for storing SAP documents. The first being SAP database, which is where that document content will reside if there isn't any additional configuration done. However, this option could vastly increase the size of the SAP database, which is problematic, especially as organizations look to move toward SAP HANA and this is pretty important. Now there are a lot of different versions and offerings of SAP available, and S/4HANA is the latest and greatest offering. I know this keeps getting extended and pushed back, but there is a deadline coming from SAP for organizations to migrate over to S/4HANA by now it's 2027, meaning that they're eventually going to phase out support for older versions of SAP. And the reason I bring this up is because with SAP HANA, the SAP database that we're talking about now is actually stored in memory, which is great for things like real-time analytics and things like data aggregation, but it doesn't add any real value to store document content. And in fact, because of the additional size of the database, the necessary memory to hold that database, it becomes a serious cost issue. So this is another important factor to be aware of, and a huge benefit of implementing Gimbal Link to move that content out of SAP and into Microsoft SharePoint. Now, shifting focus onto the middle column here, another typical place for storing documents related to SAP transactions, something called SAP Content Server. It is available to SAP customers, but the issues with using it are, although it's inexpensive to implement and to license, it still requires an IT infrastructure to run and maintain it. And it doesn't function as a true content management solution for enterprise-wide access. And it also wasn't really intended for long-term document archiving. And also shifting focus over to the right here on the far right column, there are also third-party solutions within a proprietary enterprise content management ECM models. These can be pretty expensive in terms of licensing and total cost of ownership, and do require specialized skill sets. And like we mentioned before, the migration to SAP HANA is a key issue when storing documents within the SAP database. And the migration to SAP HANA requires a trim database, so storing documents in the SAP database is really no longer a viable backup. And the ability to then be able to access this content across the enterprise, across the organization, as needed for other business and work processes, or just simply for non-SAP users to be able to access basically documents stored in SAP database, SAP Content Server, or another proprietary ECM are most likely not going to be, they won't be available to users across an organization like they would be using Microsoft SharePoint. Then the expensive licenses, upgrades, maintenance agreements, and skill set for proprietary ECM solutions like OpenText are the cost of using those other platforms for storing documents. So what's the answer to these issues? Use Microsoft SharePoint. So utilizing SharePoint for SAP content archiving and introducing your content to the benefits of the M365 ecosystem is definitely the direction to take. This leads us, into the benefits of using Gimbal Link and Microsoft 365 SharePoint for storing these documents. And whether it's, again, preparing for a SAP HANA migration or getting out of an expensive proprietary ECM, there are clear cost benefits for storing this document content in M365. And because of the additional functionality in SharePoint related to things like Power Automate and Microsoft Teams, there are benefits for being able to automate certain document-centric processes outside of SAP, as well as being able to access that shared content effectively across the enterprise. And finally, there are tools for managing risk within SharePoint, for maintaining that document content, such as access control, personal ID information, as well as other Gimbal solutions like Gimbal Records for being able to retain and dispose documents with an appropriate life cycle in a compliant manner. So once your SAP document content is stored in SharePoint and then linked back to SAP, then our Gimel record solution, it can take over the document lifecycle process from there so that it's managed effectively. And this is where Gimel comes into the picture. Gimel Link gives you this ability. So at its core, Gimel Link interfaces with SAP to remove the documents from SAP and then store them in either an on-prem version of SharePoint or in SharePoint Online. And this is the primary function of Gimel Link, which in turn enables Microsoft SharePoint as the records management, the content management, document management system for SAP customers. And so far, we've covered where companies are storing SAP content today, the costs of storing this content in other places, and some of the benefits of using Microsoft 365 for SAP content storage. Next, we'll talk about ensuring change management really through the use of a familiar interface that the end users are used to, and really it's all about the end user experience. As mentioned before, Gimel Link interfaces with SAP to remove the documents from SAP, store them in SharePoint. And now this image probably isn't the best example I could have shown here, but the main point is that when Gimel Link is implemented, nothing changes for the SAP users as we deliver the documents through the user interface, just like they were being pulled directly from SAP. And you get the added benefit of also being able to find those documents in SharePoint. So really from the SAP user's perspective, it's still business as usual. They still use SAP and create and interact with content the same way that they're used to doing. And then SharePoint users now gain visibility to this information by being able to see these documents that are now being stored in a SharePoint document library directly from the SharePoint interface that they're used to working with. So there's no need to go back and forth between the different systems. That's really a win-win for everybody involved. Now, I won't get into the technical nitty-gritty today on this call, but it's important to understand the importance of this bidirectional syncing that occurs between SAP and Microsoft SharePoint when Gimel Link is implemented. So basically, the bidirectional syncing is what keeps the SAP and SharePoint systems, and I hate to use the word synchronized, but synchronized and in agreement with each other about the document content information. So when looking at the sync from SAP to SharePoint, Gimel Link extracts the metadata, the data about data from SAP for the business objects that that document is attached to, and then it adds the metadata to SharePoint properties, the SharePoint columns for that document. It can also move documents to various SharePoint locations based on metadata routing rules that can be configured. So really the main takeaway here is that Gimel Link allows documents created in SAP to get moved into SharePoint along with all of its corresponding metadata. For a bit of a more concrete example, let's pretend that I'm an SAP user working on a new purchase order. The business transaction is created in SAP, and I attach a few documents to it. We can configure Gimel Link to look for key pieces of metadata such as a purchase order number, and then Gimel Link will identify this new purchase order that I created and then move the attached documents into the proper area in SharePoint along with all of its metadata. So Gimel Link also implements changes made on SAP objects in SharePoint or made on SAP document or on SAP, excuse me, sorry. I'll start from the beginning on this one. Gimel Link also implements changes made on SAP objects to the SharePoint documents that are linked to them. So this means if I change metadata on the SAP object, then it's automatically reflected on those linked documents in SharePoint. So this essentially maintains a one-to-one metadata correlation between SAP and SharePoint. And expanding a bit more on the bidirectional syncing that is occurring from the opposite direction, so from SharePoint to SAP, Gimel Link triggers certain SAP actions when a document is uploaded or created in SharePoint. So while there are several actions that are available, this is primarily used for linking documents to SAP business objects. So this means if I create a document in SharePoint, then it goes through a process where it gets linked back to the appropriate SAP business object based on whatever we configured in Gimel Link. So for example, let's pretend that now I'm a SharePoint user who is uploading a new document related to a purchase order into SharePoint. We can configure Gimel Link to look at an upload location of the document and then look for, again, a key piece of metadata such as a purchase order number. So Gimel Link sees that there is a corresponding matching purchase order transaction in SAP, and it'll link the SharePoint documents to that business object. And we can do other things using Gimel Link, like mentioned below here, like support for barcode linking for early archiving, linking to an SAP workflow, and then linking to custom function RFCs. But this is really the primary use case. And then next, we'll touch on a few benefits, and we've already talked a bit about the cost benefits associated with using M365 SharePoint for SAP content storage. But what we're going to talk about here are the benefits of having these documents still available in SAP, which Gimel Link allows you to do. And it's standard default functionality for SAP to store that document content, and it's accessible right here through the SAP user interface. And now again, for clarification, when Gimel Link is deployed and implemented, these documents will now be technically stored in SharePoint on the back end, but will still be available to SAP users through the SAP user interface that we're seeing here. So nothing changes for the SAP user experience. And the obvious benefits this gives the user is that documents are available where the user normally expects them to be. And what we're looking at in the image on the slide here is I see two attached test documents associated to a standard purchase order in SAP. So for SAP users, this gives the documents context. The document has context that has meaning because it is linked to a business transaction. It also gives the document security and that it's available to the same end user that has access to that business transaction within SAP. And it also gives the user some efficiency and that it maintains the flow, the working flow for the user. They don't have to break out of what they're doing to go somewhere else to find the document related to the transaction. It's all right there for them. So we've talked a lot about Gimel Link, some generic examples about what it does, the costs, and other benefits associated to it. But what about some real life scenarios? And now I think I'll hand it back off to Maya to talk about an actual client use case.
Yeah, thanks, Will. Yeah, so to kind of tie a bow on all of this, we wanted to share some real life numbers so you could get the idea. And this is on one of our clients. And this particular client is a municipal government using Gimel Link to cut costs and improve access throughout the enterprise. And so we'll get into it here on the next slide. We started with their problem. So this municipal government had an SAP document storage cost alone of around $100,000. Maintenance and support fees doubled that annual cost to $200,000. In addition to that, they had a one-time purchase of $500,000 to account for enough user licenses. With Gimel Link, the client was able to control these costs while also broadening access to the appropriate users with that bidirectional capability Will mentioned earlier. This enabled Microsoft SharePoint to really be a true enterprise-wide content management system. And as a result, this municipal government realized huge savings and saw a 70% reduction in annual maintenance support costs in less than a year. But with that, we've got a quick poll question here. We've talked a lot about Gimel Link. Would you like additional information on Gimel Link? Yes or no, not at this time. And if you do have any questions, be sure to get those in on the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. And while we're here, Will, I'll go ahead and look at these questions. We can start getting to those. And
Sure.
the first one I have for you is, what's the importance of bidirectional syncing?
Yeah, sure. So the bidirectional sync, it's extremely important because that's how Gimel Link kind of reconciles content and information between the two platforms, between SAP and SharePoint. So maintaining that synchronization, it's vital because it ensures that SAP users and SharePoint users are looking at the same thing, the same content, the same information.
Thanks, Will. So you kind of touched on it, but another question is why couldn't I just kind of put the content into SharePoint?
Yeah, sure. So keeping your content stored in the SAP database, it's an option, but at a heavy cost. So like we discussed before, it's not only a monetary cost, especially when using SAP HANA, but also a cost associated to not having this content available enterprise-wide. So compliance costs by not having records management policies applied to that content, and costs by not having this content available to additional functionality that Microsoft SharePoint really provides.
All right, another question I've got for you. We're using a proprietary ECM. How do we reduce costs and make the documents available to the enterprise?
Yeah, we can definitely help you out with that. Depending on how long the legacy ECM solution has been implemented and in use, you could have quite a bit of data that needs to be identified and migrated. Our product's called Gimel Migrate. It's really an ideal solution for this exact scenario, allowing for complex migrations of SAP related content without the need for any custom code. And we really have some great blogs on our Gimel website that I'd like to refer you to that can provide additional details on SAP migration strategies. Just type in SAP on our blogs list on our website and they'll pop right up.
All right, thanks, Will. Well, if you have any additional questions, feel free, if any of them pop in here, I'll answer any more. But if you have anything else for us, you can reference our contact information there on the screen. You can also send us an email at info@gimel.com or visit our website at www.gimel.com. And for those interested in a recording of this webinar, we will be sending it out between 24 to 48 hours in the form of a thank you email. But be sure to join our webinar next week, How to Handle Data Subject Access Requests, or DSARs. With that, that's all we have for you today, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.